Hi, this is Susan Fraser. I'm here with Hickory, and we're listening to Bad Dog Agility, where the naughty dogs train.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 6. Today we have 2 guests on the podcast. We are welcoming back Brittanys Schaezler from agilityvet.com, and we also have Jackie Bludworth. Jackie is a vet tech and also runs and handles National Agility Champion Pete's Wicked Ale. We know him as Pete. So today we're going to be talking about ligament tears in dogs. It should be noted for people who don't know that Esteban is in his day job a doctor. Brittany is obviously a vet, agility vet, and Jackie is a vet tech, and I am a computer programmer. So my only job on this entire podcast is to make sure that these 3 people speak English. So, Brittany, ligament tears in dogs. I've heard people refer to ACL injuries in dogs. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Kind of, yeah. Dogs don't really have ACLs because the anatomy is different, but it is analogous to an ACL in a person. So a lot of people will say ACL. Your vet will know what you're talking about if you say ACL. Technically, it's a cranial cruciate ligament that we're talking about, or a CCL, but that's okay. You know, the other anatomy point is that the knee joint is the one we're talking about. A lot of times we'll also call it the stifle joint is the technical term for it.
So tell us a little bit about these injuries and what the treatment options are for dogs that are having these, because I hear people talking about these more and more. It seems like they're a pseudo-common occurrence in agility dogs.
They're very common in all dogs, especially in agility dogs. And I feel like we've gotten better at recognizing them in the last 10 years or so. So I don't think they're any more common now than they used to be. I just think we catch them earlier and we understand when we're starting to get knee pain that that's probably what's going on. The cruciate ligament, dogs have 2 of them, a cranial one and a caudal one. The cranial one is the one that we're typically dealing with when it injures, and that ligament's job is to keep the tibia from sliding forward when a dog is walking normally. And when it tears, that joint becomes unstable, the bone starts to move abnormally, and you'll get inflammation and pain, swelling of that joint capsule, and then that promotes further degeneration of that ligament. So when you're looking at these injuries, there's a couple different sort of classes of dogs. So you can have, in your agility dogs, it's typically a fit dog and it's a sudden forceful injury. So it's a normal joint, nothing's abnormal going on there, but they slip bad. And that causes trauma to that ligament, tears it a little bit, and you end up with acute non-weight-bearing lameness is the normal first sign when you tear a cruciate ligament. I also see it a lot in day practice in sort of middle-aged dogs. They're overweight, typically large breed dogs. And those guys, it's usually they're tearing a little bit at a time over time. So it's slow degeneration until one day the dog steps bad and they tear that ligament. And so that's actually, in the real world, that's the more common one that we see a whole lot. But for our purposes, we're dealing with that sort of sudden abnormal force that causes a tear of that ligament. It should be noted, conformation definitely plays a part. Dogs with straight stifles, so their angle of that knee joint is not as appropriate as it should be, may be more predisposed, and dogs that have luxating patellas can actually be predisposed to having cruciate tears.
So would there be certain breeds that, due to their conformation, would be more predisposed?
Yeah, I mean, labs are the sort of the picture breed of cruciate ligament tears, but I wouldn't say that their conformation is any more abnormal. Actually, some of the breeds I can think of that have typically straight stifles are not really any more represented. The research shows dogs that are overweight are more likely to tear their ligament. Inactive, sedentary dogs are more likely. There actually is one study that shows a genetic predisposition in Newfoundlands, and so it reasons that there would be some sort of genetic factor in other dogs where it occurs commonly. And there's a couple different studies about early spay neuter, meaning before 6 months of age. So like 12-week-old puppies getting spayed and neutered, that may be they're overrepresented underrepresented in dogs that tear their cruciate, but there's different research studies saying different things. So I don't know how relevant that is.
Okay. But for the Bad Dog Agility podcast, we're going to focus on the agility injury. Something happens when they're running in practice or in the backyard or on course that causes this injury.
Right. That's what we're focusing on today.
Okay.
If you're worried about your dog having a cruciate injury, what signs are they going to show? The normal average sign is going to be everything is fine, and then all of a sudden your dog comes up carrying one of their rear legs. Sometimes you see them slip, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you went to practice, you come home, this is what happened to me. You go to practice, you come home, a couple hours later your dog stands up on 3 legs. That's your normal first sign. Most of the time you take them to the vet, you go, and nothing's broken. Let's rest them. Let's do some anti-inflammatory pain meds and let's see what happens. Sometimes those dogs will improve, but normally what's going to happen is it's going to come back. It may be with work, or it may be, again, like Ticket was 100% fine until the next time she came up on 3 legs. So it tends to come and go, but typically it's something that activity is going to make worse. If your dog has a complete tear, a lot of times they will not improve with rest and anti-inflammatories, or not improve very much. So if that joint is that unstable, rest isn't going to make it better in the short term.
Okay, so you've done your rest, you've put them on anti-inflammatories, they're still coming up lame, so then what's the next step?
So go back to the vet, and your vet may have noticed this on the first visit, but if you have a complete cruciate tear, the classic sign of that is called positive cranial drawer. What that means is when you're manipulating that joint, you're trying to slide the tibia, which is sort of the shin bone on a dog, forward. The ligament's job is to keep that from happening, and if that ligament is torn, you can cause that abnormal motion. So that is pretty much diagnostic. You have a cruciate tear. That is not that common in my practice, where I'm like, oh, look, it's an obvious cruciate tear. Much more often, we have partial tears, and that's why not having that cranial drawer sign does not mean that your dog does not have a cruciate injury. And I see that a lot where people are like, oh, they didn't have it, so that's not what it is. And that's just not true. If you have part of that ligament still intact, you may not get cranial drawer, but that may still be what's going on. Other things you'll take x-rays of the joint, and when you do that, you may see swelling of the joint. That's very, very typical. If it's been going on chronically, you may start to see arthritis in that joint. And the other thing on exam that's very, very diagnostic of a cruciate injury is pain when you extend that stifle. So it's really one of those things that it's so common that if you have a dog that has those signs of sort of coming and going lameness, and they have some swelling of the joint, and they have pain on extension of their stifle, in my mind, that's a cruciate injury until proven otherwise.
Okay. And so not only are you a vet, but you have actually been through this with your dog as a patient, right?
Sadly, yes. Yeah. Ticket, my very young Sheltie, had this, I guess it's been about 9 months ago, and we'll be going through it again. So yeah, unfortunately, been on both sides of the table on this one.
And with her, it was a partial tear?
It was. We caught it very, very early. She was non-weight bearing lame, did fine, competed for 2 months, and then randomly in the middle of the week stood up non-weight bearing lame again. And that's when I took her to an orthopedic specialist, and she had no signs of arthritis, but a little bit of swelling and pain on extension of the stifle. And he said, it's cruciate injury. And I went, really? Does it have to be? And he said, yep, it is. And it was. So.
All right. So then how do we fix it?
Fixing it, there's several surgical options, and the reason is because historically there hasn't been one surgery that's fantastically better than everything else. But the one that is the most popular right now, and the one that anecdotally dogs seem to return to their previous function the best with, is the TPLO, which stands for Tibial Plateau Leveling Osteotomy. And so that's the one we're going to focus on. There are other surgical options, but anecdotally, most surgeons think that's the best one for working dogs. And anecdotally, a whole lot of agility dogs have had that surgery and returned to really high performance levels like Pete. So that's the one we're going to focus on today, because that's the one that far and away most people are going to pursue. TPLO is not trying to replace the function of the ligament. That's the way a couple of the other surgical options work, is they're like putting an implant in there, like a piece of suture to try to act like the ligament does. TPLO works by actually changing the mechanics of the joint so that the forces aren't the same on that bone anymore. It changes the angle of the tibial plateau, which is that, again, that lower bone, so that it's physically unable to slide forward anymore, even if you have no cruciate ligament. Basically, they go in, they cut with a saw the top of the tibia off, reposition it at a different angle, and then plate it back on with a special plate. So basically, it makes the fact that there is no cruciate ligament sort of a moot point. The other part of the surgery is they're going to go in the joint, they're going to evaluate the joint, look if there's any arthritis, clean up any cartilage tears, evaluate the meniscus, which is another part of the joint that can get damaged with cruciate tears, and try to sort of clean all that up as well. Some surgeons actually have an arthroscope to do that. So it's minimally invasive. It's just a little camera that goes in there. They can cut out any rough cartilage with it. They can really look at the whole joint with just a little tiny hole. And that's actually really the only good way to confirm a partial tear. So with Ticket, I was like, can we do MRI to say for sure before we do this radical surgery that there is a partial tear there? And he said the way they do it is they use the arthroscopy to confirm the partial tear before they get to the part where they cut up the bone, because MRI, it's just not detailed enough. And so you could miss a partial tear even if you spent the money on the MRI. So not all surgeons will use the arthroscope. Some will actually cut into the joint, and that might take a little longer to heal. But either way, the TPLO part of the surgery is the same with the implants and everything.
So once you do the surgery, what does the rehab look like? How do we get our dog from the operating table back to the agility ring?
So the most important thing after TPLO surgery is 8 weeks of crate rest, because that is how long it takes for that bone to heal. And it's just critical. If you're going to have a failure of the surgery, it's probably going to be because the dog got off leash and ran or had some activity that was inappropriate. The first 4 weeks, the biggest risk is hardware failure. So the plate breaks, a screw backs out, something like that. And then the second 4 weeks, it's not as scary. You're just waiting for the bone to heal. Most rehab is going to begin sometimes as soon as as the surgery is done, they will start using some kind of electrical stimulation or icing the knee, things like that, while the dog is still on the table and recovering from anesthesia. It depends on your surgery facility. But the big goals with rehab are to get your range of motion back to normal or as close as possible. And I think realistically, that's the most important one, because as soon as you cut that knee, you lose range of motion in it. And that's what it used to be. They would put them in a crate and not mess with them at all for 8 weeks. And those dogs would lose so much range of motion in that knee. And then you're fighting an uphill battle to get it back. So that is something that the day they come home from surgery, you're working on range of motion to try to get that knee joint back to where it was.
And that might have been fine for those other classes of dogs, like the overweight dogs or whatever that you're doing this surgery for. But in agility, we've got to get that range of motion so that we can get them jumping well and able to do all of the physical things that are involved in agility.
Absolutely. I think that's why for an agility dog, I really do think that that's the most important one, more so than strength or anything else. It's if they can't bend that knee, they're not going to be able to keep bars up, or, they may have problems getting up the A-frame, things like that. So and that's something that you can start working on right away. You don't have to wait for the bone to heal. The other focuses of rehab are relearning proprioception of the leg. So proprioception is knowing where they're placing it. And that's something that after the surgery, it can be compromised. And it's obviously a big deal in agility. If a dog does not know where their back leg is, they're going to fall off of something.
So like maybe some tricks or, any kind of rear end awareness exercises would be good for that.
Yeah, definitely. The big thing that I did and that a lot of rehab people do is the cavaletti. So picking their legs up and it's actually good for range of motion too, but having to pick up their leg and place it on things. The other two obvious ones are returning to your previous muscle strength It's amazing how fast dogs lose muscle after that surgery or with inactivity. I mean, it's so dramatic. So you've got to get them, first you got to get them even with the other leg, and then you've got to get both legs back to where they were before. So their previous level of fitness. So that's pretty much your goals with rehab, and how fast you can get there. It just depends on the level of healing that they're at. So you're not working on cardiovascular fitness until after the 8 weeks, where the bone is healed and they can actually start to have a really good activity level. The first 2 weeks, your dog's still going to have sutures in their leg, and you're not doing a whole bunch of rehab. The big thing is passive range of motion. So your dog is laying down and you're just moving that knee through a normal range of motion, through whatever's comfortable. You don't want to force it, and you don't want to do stretches. You're not trying to put that much force on the knee. You're just trying to keep it moving through what's normal. Use ice to decrease the inflammation for the first week or so. You can use heat to warm it up later on, but you don't want to do that right after surgery.
Your dogs must be very different from mine, because I cannot imagine having them in crate rest and then having them lie still while I move their legs all around.
I was so surprised at how Ticket did. Like, I'm not kidding. I have pictures of her posted where she is just laying there with her head on my leg while I'm icing her knee with an ice pack, and she's not moving. She's just laying there. And I was shocked at how good she was. So I'm certain that for some dogs, the 8 weeks of crate rest is gonna, it's gonna be hard, and that low activity level is going to be really hard. But I was pleasantly surprised. Ticket doesn't have an off switch, but she did okay with it. So
yeah. I'm sure they know that they need that rest. I'm sure they aren't feeling 100%,
right.
And they they want that and need that too.
Yeah, I actually had a much harder time later on, like at about weeks 5, 6, where she was starting to get to do more. So we were going on longer walks. And so that's the next step. You're starting 5-minute walks and gradually increasing those. You start stretching. You start the cavaletti, which is just little bars at various heights for them to step over. If you're going to a rehab center, you may do the underwater treadmill. And you're slowly increasing all of that. And my problem came at about week 5 or 6, where Ticket was going on these 15-minute walks, and she was starting to feel better, and her brain just exploded. And I had to start teaching her tricks, because it didn't involve any mental stimulation. It was like, whatever, walk over these bars. Oh, go on this walk really, really slow. So there was nothing mental about it, and she was horrible. So that's when I taught her how to play dead, which is hilarious if you've ever seen it on YouTube.
All right, so swimming, you mentioned the underwater treadmill.
Yeah, so underwater treadmill is fantastic. For some dogs, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. So I will quote Nancy, Ticket's physical therapist, who basically said, the underwater treadmill is not going to be holy water for Ticket. For some, I know, I love that. So for some dogs, if you've got a 5-year-old Mastiff with bilateral cruciate tears, they are not going to be able to get their weight up on their own in your average land environment. So the treadmill is really, really important for those dogs. The water supports their weight. They're able to walk a little bit more normally, and it really, really helps them. For other dogs, it's not going to be as big a deal. But it's great because you've got the support of the water, but you've also got that resistance of the water to increase their effort. A lot of the treadmills, they'll actually offer an incline, so you can actually start working on inclines in the water, at varying speeds. So it's really, really great to get their muscle back, for their range of motion, and to increase their fitness. So it really works a lot of the different goals of rehab. And if you're going somewhere routinely, they're going to be gradually increasing that work level as your dog continues to improve. I will say swimming is not a good idea. So if you've seen, not in the first 8 weeks, I think swimming is fantastic for conditioning. I think it's great for getting them back to fitness. But if you've ever watched a dog's legs when they swim, it's a really, really jerky, forceful motion. And that is not what you want that knee doing while it's healing. So a lot of people go because they have a pool and they put their dog in the pool. And that is not, walking in the water is much better than active swimming. Swimming is something that should be saved until the bone is healed. And even then, you've got to build it up because you can put a lot of pressure on that tendon that's left there, the patellar tendon, and actually cause tendinitis if you're not careful. So I think a lot of people think, oh, swimming, it's great, it's no impact, but it's not great for a knee injury all the time.
That is a fantastic overview of the injury and what causes it and the TPL surgery itself. But Jackie has been through this as well with her dog Pete, and was able to not only have the surgery and go through rehab and get back into agility, but after all of that became a national agility champion. So we want to hear a little bit about Jackie's story, kind of the anecdote of what happened with you and Pete, and how you managed to get him back to full function.
Sure, no problem. And listening to Brittany speak about it just made me relive those long months back when it happened. So pretty much Pete was a 5-year-old dog, and he was out for his afternoon potty. I actually did not see the injury. My husband at the time called me and said, oh my God, Pete's hip's dislocated.
Oh, no.
So I'm on the phone driving home, not knowing what's going on. He goes, I'll call you back. That's all I knew. He called me back. Meet me at the vet's. I walk into the vet's office, which he carried the dog Pete back to the house about a quarter of a mile. Anyway, I meet him at the vet's, and the first thing the vet told me was, your husband broke your dog.
Oh, no.
I said, okay, elaborate. He goes,
Yeah.
it's a cruciate ligament tear. His career, it's going to affect his career. And I went, okay. And background, I had entered Pete in tryouts for the first time, thanks to Esteban's pushing, like, come on, you can do this, you can do this. So I had all this in my mind. So I asked right away, well, can he do tryouts in 2 weeks? And the vet's like, no, you can't do it. So that happened on a Friday. Monday, we went to the specialist, and he had surgery on Wednesday.
Wow.
So he had surgery actually 5 days after the injury. And it was a very acute injury, so there was no arthritis built up or what have you. For me, it was very scary hearing what the TPLO was, because when they describe of cutting the bone and re-angling the knee, and I'm like, but it's just a partial tear? They have to do all of that? So I went through all the emotions that Brittany's gone through, that many of our current competitors are going through right now with their dogs. And it is a scary thing to hear, but the dogs do come through it fine. My biggest thing with rehab, so the 8 weeks of crate rest that Brittany mentioned is critical. I hear about some people keeping their dogs, and this is for Pete, he could not do this, people keeping their dogs in X-pens. I was not going to do that because X-pens, they can jump on their back leg, they can move around too much. Pete was in a crate 8 weeks unless he was out on leash doing rehab.
And he's a border collie, big border collie.
Yes, he's a big border collie. He's 22 and a half inches at the shoulders. He's 52 to 55 pounds, and he's not fat. He's just big boned. He's a very, very big, large dog. So the rehab with him, so I lived at the time close to Galveston. So our rehab consisted of pretty much what Brittany mentioned, but we also did lots of walks in the sand on the beach. We did lots of incline walking where his left side, his left front and left rear would be higher than his right front and right rear. So we walk up and down like embankments, like bayous and stuff, just to help his strength. Pete's biggest thing was he was using the back leg, but it's almost like Brittany said, they forget they can trust it. They can forget they can use it. So I had to figure out how to teach this dog, use your back left leg again. It was his left leg that he tore. So we did a lot of, I had the same physical therapist that Brittany has for Ticket, Nancy. So she gave me an at-home program to follow, and a lot of it was just basic stuff. Some of it was I would hold his front left leg and his right rear leg up off the ground, and he had to balance the opposing diagonal legs, if that makes sense, if y'all can picture it.
Yep.
So just different things like that, making him back up the stairs. The biggest thing I noticed was, and Brittany again touched on this, was the muscle loss. I had this big strapping border collie, very powerful dog, and he lost so much muscle mass on both sides of his leg, both legs. So that was pretty shocking to see. I didn't jump back into agility as quick as Brittany did with Ticket. Pete was an older dog when this happened. He's also a bigger dog. It took me probably, I want to say 6 months from surgery before I started agility again, mainly because I was so afraid Ticket's like this too, but I was afraid Pete would just come out of the starting blocks like an idiot and hurt.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern.
Yeah, and then the vets always tell you, well, 60 to 70% chance he'll tear the other leg.
Oh, great.
I was like, oh, nice. Okay. So I was very concerned when I finally took the jump and started him back in class again. Like this would help, but I would try and say like over and calmly, hoping that would help. Yeah, it didn't.
Right.
He actually fell a lot, which really concerned me, making left turns. I guess the angle had changed some with him, but he fell a lot. So I did the dog walk last because of that. There's two, I guess, main jumping programs that I'm aware of that we have in the United States. I pulled different parts from both of those jumping programs.
That would be Susan Salo and Linda Mecklenburg?
Linda Mecklenburg's program, the jumping skills. Different elements of those two programs to force Pete to use his back legs, to force him to rock back. Because he's so powerful up front, I was starting to see him run around the course just using his front end.
Right.
So I did the same thing with Ticket when she came back. I used both of them. I'd never used Linda's before, but I did for that, powering off their back end and having to tuck and get over the bar.
Yeah, so I really worked on that, and pretty much it was 11 months from the date of surgery to when I put him back in the ring again.
Wow.
For Pete. I was just scared to death he was going to do something stupid and hurt himself. The vets were, every time we went in for our checkup, textbook recovery, perfect, couldn't be happier. He really did a very good recovery, and that was thanks to Nancy giving me the rehab, and then, of course, the surgeon, Dr. Beal, that he did a great job with surgery.
Well, and thanks to you following it. I mean, that's no small thing. The compliance of the patient is key.
Yeah.
It's very hard. It's harder to get than you'd think.
Right.
Yes, and Pete wasn't like Ticket that just lay there for his icing and his passive range of motion. No, he had to be restrained. Like someone had to hold him down while I did all this. He was not a happy camper. Just more funny backgrounds on that. I had a house down by Galveston on stilts. So for 8 weeks, I lifted him up and down the stairs. So to go to the bathroom 3-4 times a day, I'm lifting the 55-pound dog up and down the steps. So I got to work out too. So anyway, fast forward to when we put him back in the ring. I had 8 million eyes on him. So, I told everybody, if he looks off, if he looks bad, tell me. I'm pulling him out. He didn't. He came back. Took him 11 months, but came back like nothing was wrong. I was just looking at my data sheet. We only entered 5 trials in 2009 to qualify for the 2010 Nationals in Tulsa.
Wow.
He actually came back and got the 6 double Qs required on the very last qualifying weekend.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
No pressure.
That 6 double Q was for his mock. So it was like,
oh my gosh.
It was just like things were building up to, it was just perfect. Like, 5 trials. He got the 6 double Qs, got his mock. Everything was going great. I entered, I think, like 3 trials before Nationals in Tulsa. And again, we were clicking. Our teamwork never faltered. And he came back and he was as strong as ever. And the stars were aligned and we were very lucky. And, we just had a great weekend. It was actually Pete's first ever perfect weekend. He went 6 for 6 in Tulsa, and I'll never forget when he finished. The announce, you hear the crowds, the announcer saying, "How's that for a comeback from ACL surgery?" I was like, "Yeah, wow."
That's amazing. So he's a national agility champion at 24 inches, right?
At 4 inches, yep. And he, like I said, it was a perfect textbook surgery, recovery, rehab, and it took me a long time to get back into the ring. But once we did, it just was perfect. He didn't really put a foot out of place. Although I will say, because I watched that run, his winning run over and over again, it was a left turn off the triple to the A-frame, and he does slip. That left leg goes out from under him a little bit, and he recovered just fine. Only I probably noticed that. So that's pretty much how we did it, just really following the rehab notes and to the letter. Keep your dog confined and doing everything that your vet tells you to do and your rehab specialist tells you to do. And don't be in a hurry to get back into the ring. The agility will be there. Just take care of your dog first.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I want to hear a little bit about what you're doing with Pete now as far as training, because I'll tell you that I trained with Jackie and Pete. This is back when I had the Rottweiler, and we were in class together, and Pete was just an animal. He could go the solid hour, rep after rep, in 90-plus degree Houston weather, and he was a real animal. what have you changed about your training post-surgery?
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. Well, I will say back when Pete Esteban was an animal, I never did do a lot of agility training, but they were constantly, I love to throw a ball for my dogs with the chuck it. So every day in the 90-degree heat, they would retrieve ball for like half an hour, just basically doing sprints, back and forth for the ball. And then we go to the bay, Galveston Bay, to cool off and do swimming, jumping off the docks. So that was like their fitness workout, I guess. And then once a week we went to class for agility. Post-surgery and then I guess nationals, I don't do as much ball throwing for him. He can only go for a dead ball. So I'll throw it, let it land. I'll release him, probably tell him lie down, and then he gets it because I'm so afraid to since the surgery, I am on eggshells with him all the time. I'm just so afraid he's going to hurt himself. But I've also recently dropped Pete to 20 inches just to help him out. He is starting to get some arthritis in that joint, but he's also 9 years old this summer. Also, anytime you open up a joint, you are going to get arthritis in that joint. That's just the nature of opening up a joint to the atmosphere. It's going to happen. So he does have arthritis in the joint. I train him once or twice a week, maybe. The ball throwing, instead of going to a huge field and throwing it 50, 60 feet, is in my backyard. So he gets to run 10 feet, 15 feet. He doesn't get to swim anymore because I don't live near Galveston. But I will say because of that, he has lost some of the fitness. But I'm also letting him grow old gracefully, shall we say. He's almost 9. So there's no reason for him to be running like he was when he was 4, 5 years old, like an animal.
That's right.
It's still amazing, though, to hear that story and to hear him not just come back to agility. I mean, that's what everybody wants for their dog, is for them to come back to agility. But to come back and become a national champion, I mean, it's just amazing.
It was awesome. And yeah, for him to come back from that surgery and even he had a great comeback and doing great in agility. But if you watch him even now, the left leg, and Brittany will probably notice it, other vets will notice it, but the left leg, it's not right. It has a little gait. He has a little hitch and get along, I guess you say down in Texas. Right. He does. He has a little hitch, but they've changed the angle of the knee, so it's not going to work like the other knee.
But they just adjust. I mean, that's what dogs do. They adjust to their situation and to how they're feeling.
Yep.
And Brittany, just anecdotally, I mean, other dogs competing at high levels that have also had this surgery, right?
Yeah, I mean, dogs have been on the world team after that surgery. I know Jean LaValle with Taz. Taz had that surgery, and Taz is obviously a much smaller dog, but I know she had it, and I want to say it was maybe 7 months later, she won a spot onto the team with her older Sheltie Taz. So,
wow.
Same thing. She took a lot of time to get back into the ring, and I know she's told me that she was real nervous, but she just recovered great. And there's plenty of other dogs out there that have made it back. And that's why, even though there's no hard research papers out there that say, oh yeah, this is, look how much greater this surgery is. And Jackie's right. No matter what you do, they're going to get arthritis. But it just anecdotally, there have been so many success stories that I do think it's worth it, even though when you describe the surgery, it sounds so extreme.
It does.
It is. It's scary. When Ticket had it, I actually watched the scope part and got to watch him put it in the knee and, oh, look, there's the cruciate ligament. Oh, look, it's torn. But when it was time to pull out the power tools, I was out of there. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. I don't like it. And I did not want to see him saw my dog's leg, so I waited in the lobby for that part. Yeah. But I mean, it's a scary sounding surgery, but it is proven over the years that dogs can come back from it. I mean, it's not without potential problems. Anytime you put something like an implant in the knee, there's a risk there. It's anytime you cut the bone, you have to worry about the healing of it. But I think for most dogs, they tend to do very, very well.
And anybody who has concerns about their dog should obviously talk to their vet and get their vet's opinion and see what options are available in their area.
Definitely. And if you're not sure, I mean, it's never wrong to ask for a referral to an orthopedic vet to have their opinion. But realistically, with cruciate tears, even with a partial tear, the vast, vast majority will become a complete tear. And the entire time you're waiting for that to happen, there's inflammation, you're getting arthritis, you have instability, you have pain. So you definitely can manage a partial tear for a little while. I'm doing it right now with Ticket, and I'm doing everything I can to sort of manage it, knowing that it's not ideal. And I'm just waiting for the right time to do surgery, basically.
On the other side, right?
Yes. Yes. Sorry. She had surgery on her left leg. And like Jackie was saying, about half of dogs will go on to tear the ligament in the other side. And I don't know that there's really a whole lot you can do to prevent it, because as soon as they injure one, they start to compensate by using the opposite one more. And so you can't really do anything about it. And Ticket was about literally she went for her 6-month recheck, and I'm pretty sure she injured the other one the following weekend. So yes, very, very unfortunate and upsetting. And I'm just, like I said, waiting for the right time right now and just trying to manage it. But I did the research. I went out there. I looked for things to try to manage a partial tear, and I just can't find anything that's proven. And I just don't think it's worth risking your dog's long-term career and long-term health when there is a good surgical option out there. And Ticket did fantastic with that first surgery. She was basically in the top, this is per Nancy, in the top 1% of dogs after that surgery the entire time. At about 6 weeks after the surgery, she was back to equal muscle mass in both rear legs. And that was just, but realize she was a 2-year-old dog. She's a 2-year-old, 20-pound dog. So it's a lot easier than dealing with a larger dog, an older dog, an overweight dog. We've had some setbacks, but I think once we get going and she turns into the bionic Sheltie, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember competing with Sammy, and Esteban used to always say it was unfair because I had a bionic dog. It's not fair. That's why I would win occasionally over his dog.
That's the only reason.
Yeah, that's the
only explanation
was the implants.
No comment. Well, now let me ask you this. You mentioned that you'd been running Ticket on the partial tear. What kind of risk are people running when they say, hey, I'm not going to have the surgery. I understand my dog probably has a partial tear, but, I need 1 or 2 double Qs, or I really want to go to nationals, or I'd like to finish their mock. What if someone says, hey, I've heard that there are dogs out there running with partial tears, and why can't my dog be one of them?
You definitely can manage it in the short term. If you have a partial tear, like I said, the vast majority are going to become a complete tear, and it's definitely preferable to have the surgery sooner rather than later. So it's not an emergency surgery. Oh my God, my dog tore it. I have to have surgery tomorrow. But it's something that the longer it goes, the more likely arthritis is going to develop. The entire time that you have that partial tear, there's inflammatory factors in the knee, and those are going to start degrading the remaining ligament. So you would really like to have the surgery before it progresses to a complete tear.
All right, so I'm sure that there's like a magic program to make sure that this never happens to your dog, and just neither one of you chose to follow it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love to say the field that Pete tore his in, every single afternoon after work, him and my other dog would race across after, got to a certain point, off leash, race across and go potty every day for 5 years. And he stepped in the hole.
Right.
That's been there for 5 years.
Right.
So, yeah, there's no magical, unless you keep them in a bubble, which we can't do.
Right. So that was heavy sarcasm on my point. But I mean, so is there any prevention?
So beyond what most agility competitors are doing, keeping their dog thin, keeping them fit. So not having the weekend warrior. You go out, you go to class once a week, you go to shows on the weekend, taking your dog for walks, doing strengthening exercises, whether that's swimming, whether that's getting one of the peanut balls and working on that, doing stairs. I mean, just, you don't have to go to a rehab specialist to do this stuff. There's a lot of DVDs out there about things to do to strengthen your dog. So doing that, adequate warm up and cool down. I know some people that go out and they just start throwing the frisbee or throwing the ball for their dog, and they consider that their warm up. That's like you getting out of bed, and going and doing sprints in the backyard. You're much more likely to injure your muscles that way. You want a gradual warm up. So walking, trotting, you don't want to pull him out of the crate and run, and you don't want to shove him back in the crate right after you're done. You don't want to work your dog to exhaustion. And I think this is much more common in the summer, and I have to be real careful with Ticket because the heat doesn't turn her off. She looks like she's going to die, but she will keep going, giving 100% every time. And when they're working that hard and they're that exhausted, they're not going to be as careful. They're not going to protect themselves. They're much more likely to slip. So you have to be the responsible one. If you have a dog like that and not forget to give your dog a break, remember to stop. If they're really starting to look hot and their tongue's touching the ground, they're working pretty hard, even if it doesn't seem like they've done that much. The other thing, like Jackie said, being in the same place for 5 years before it happened. If it's going to happen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your dog does agility. It doesn't matter if your dog chases the Frisbee. It could just be your dog walking down the driveway and steps wrong. And it doesn't have to be in a hole. It can just be, oh my goodness, today the ligament broke. So unless you keep your dog in a bubble, you're not going to stop it from happening. And I see way more dogs that did it, chasing a squirrel in the backyard or chasing a tennis ball than a dog that was doing the weave pulls or came off the A-frame and did it. That can definitely happen, but it's not agility's fault. It was going to happen if that was the case.
Right.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there is no magic. Oh yeah, do this and your dog won't get a cruciate tear. I mean, if there was, I'd be retired in Barbados.
Right. But at least there is a surgical option, and anecdotally, it seems to work really well. And we're really excited for Jackie and Pete. And Brittany, we are going to look for Ticket to be the next success story and to be our 16-inch national agility champion. Think you can do that for us?
Sure, no problem.
It would really make this podcast
we'll have to revisit
successful.
It in 2 years.
Yeah, in 2 years we'll have a whole resurgence of people downloading the podcast when you win nationals.
Awesome.
Well, even at the regional a few weeks ago, Ticket was there, and I had a couple. They were like, "Oh, that's your young dog," and I was like, "Yeah, that's the one that had TPLO," and it blew their mind that she had that before, and that was actually her running on a partial tear at the time too. So, yeah, I mean, they can definitely come back to 100%. And how long it takes, it varies. Jackie took a really long time because she was unsure. I would say average, maybe 6 months back to the ring. Ticket was exceptionally fast, but she had a lot of factors going for her. I don't know if I will be as fast to get her back in the ring after the second one. A lot of it will just depend on the timing and the time of year and things like that. But, it's definitely something, and I've lots of people, lots of dogs have gotten their dogs back in there quickly and back to the same form, made it back to nationals, made it back to invitational, made it back on the world team. So it's not a career-ending injury. It's definitely scary, but if you put the work in and you don't mess around with it, have the surgery done sooner rather than later, it's definitely something that your dog can come back from and continue to have a great career, obviously.
Well, thanks to both of you for coming on today, and hopefully we shed some light on the injury and the surgery and gave people something to think about.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Yeah. And if anyone has any more questions, they're certainly welcome to comment on my webpage or email me. I can't comment on specific, your pet did this, blah, 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 because I haven't seen your pet. But if you have any more general questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And she's at agilityvet.com. And as always, we will have links on the podcast page to some of the things that we've been talking about. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Visit us at baddogagility.com and look for the big orange button on the right-hand side if you're interested in introducing our podcast.
We also have plenty of training articles, and we would love to hear your comments.
And sign up for our free newsletter on our site so you never miss an article.
Happy training.